So great, now we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And I have a really special treat today. We have Carrie McKeegan from Greenback Expat Tax Services. And I saw on the website that it's a global virtual business which prepares U.S. federal tax returns for American expats living all over the world. So I found that extremely interesting because I'm in that category. So Carrie, welcome. Thanks for letting me interview you. And
Thanks for having me.
It's great. And let's start by having you talk about what Greenback Expat Tax Services is. Sorry, I keep botching that. Greenback Expat Tax Services. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you guys work.
Sure. So we are a company that prepares tax returns for Americans who live overseas. It was born very much out of a similar situation as what you're describing, where we were living overseas, working at big banks, couldn't get anyone to do our taxes, and thought there is an absolute need for this. So we focus very much on that one area. We also do the FBAR reporting for folks because that's something that's come up quite a lot over the last couple of years. And we work with clients in 115 countries at this point. So got a pretty broad reach at this point.
And so then let's get into what does your virtual office look like? How are you structured with accountants? What is it? How is it set up?
Sure. Everyone works from home offices. So there are about 50 people on the team, of which about 38 or so are accountants, and about 12 are what we describe as kind of the management team that looks at, sales and finance and operations and makes things run smoothly from a systems perspective. We all work from our home offices. We've got this amazing setup whereby we basically all kind of log into the same place. We've got, everyone's got set working hours. Everyone has that kind of consistency and reliability around when they'll be online and making sure that they're communicating. It's fairly formal in terms of the setup. But everyone's doing it, from different places for each person. So I work out of a workspace most days. Some people do the same, and some people, have an office in their home, but everyone's at home, and 98% of people, I would say, are based out of the US. So there's a few people that are also Americans living abroad, so expats, but most people are based out of the US, particularly the accountants, because by definition, they're, CPAs, so they're more likely to be in the US.
Ah, right. And you say you have set working hours. I find this really interesting. So is this something that you agree on as a team, or how did that come about to have the set working hours? Because
sure.
that's really a different time zone.
Yeah, and sorry, I should clarify a little. So not everyone has the exact same working hours.
Okay.
But they're set. So what I mean by that is, if we bring somebody in, and let's say, using an example of one of the members of our team, she is an American and she's living in Argentina. She basically has a fixed work day. So it's not a work when you can and trying to overlap. She's got a fixed work day. And when we set that, we took into account with her what her preferences are around when she likes to work, and also how there's a reasonable overlap with the rest of the team that are mostly, in the US, for example. But the distinction that I guess I'm trying to make with the set working hours thing is there's a lot of misperception that if you're working in a virtual office, that you're sort of working in your pajamas at 10 o'clock at night from, your laptop in the bed. And, that happens in the way that when you overlap into that time because you have a particularly long day, sometimes I'm sure people do things like that, but that's not the norm. And we very much encourage people to have a lot of structure and focus in their workday rather than having it be as and when and different each day.
Oh, interesting. Super interesting. And so and you make sure that there's some overlap with the team so that everybody has at least some sort of communication with each other.
Exactly.
And how do you find your talent? How do you find the people that you want to work with?
A lot on LinkedIn. It's become easier over time as we've gotten to be a bigger company to find people, because we tend to find that as you get larger, people come to you. They understand, particularly from an accountant point of view. It's a small community, and so you get people kind of knocking on your door. But in general, we advertise on the same job boards that you probably would if you were a traditional brick and mortar company. Places like Indeed, the Ladders, places like that, and also then get quite a lot from LinkedIn, just people who are in the same circles and general interests that we then draw in and either asked to apply for a particular job, or, they contact us about a role.
That makes sense. There's sort of this network effect that you start to get to know people, and then, they come to you. I hear that a lot. I really like that. And what do you think is so appealing for the accountants? I mean, I have my own stereotype of what I'm thinking, but but I'm curious. What's appealing for the accountants and working with Greenback?
I think that they, a lot of the accountants that we have come from very traditional backgrounds, so have spent many years commuting in and out of an office, maybe working on, expat tax returns, so still working with those clients directly, but often in kind of bigger shops, you maybe have a little less client contact in some roles. So what we hear a lot from the accountants that are working with us is they love working with people who are all abroad and working directly, having that one-to-one relationship. You meet really interesting people. I mean, people have really interesting stories when you're talking to people who have, moved to the Netherlands, moved to Bali, moved to, London. Everyone's got an interesting story. So they enjoy the client interaction and that piece of it. They enjoy working from home. They enjoy having that, no commute, none of that kind of overhead that you have when you're commuting into an office. And we also, we think that as a team, it's a fairly nice team. We're very focused around making it a nice place to work, making something where people feel engaged, they feel excited about working for the team, and that they get to know each other, which, I couldn't have envisaged it before we started the business, how deep the relationships are when you don't sit next to each other day to day. But somehow it happens, somehow people get to know each other in a way that even if they can't actually, physically touch each other, they really feel like they know each other, and it just kind of works somehow.
I'm really glad you bring this up, because this is something that I've been exploring as well. I've got a collaboration partner that we've worked together for the last 5 years. She's in California, I'm in the Netherlands, and we started on a client project together. And then when that client project ended, we liked working together so much, we've continued to do it even to this day, and it's been 5 years. I've never met her in person, and she's one of my best friends. It's
it happens. It works somehow. Yeah.
So I'm curious about how do you guys communicate with each other as a company? How are these? I want to understand how these deep relationships gets formed within your company, because I know it's possible, but it seems to be something that's very difficult for most remote teams.
Yeah. Well, we use a project management tool that has kind of a chat feature. We don't use email, which is a very, very unusual thing. And everyone communicates in this tool. So you sort of chat back and forth in the chat area, and you group conversations within the context of threads relating to what it is you're discussing. And what that really helps to do is it allows visibility of projects without the sort of terrible, I've been CC'd on 8 million things. So you can kind of bring people in and out of conversations as it's relevant to them. But they also have visibility if they ever think, hey, I wonder what's going on with a marketing promotion that we're doing, and it's somebody in the finance team. They just kind of go in and take a look and maybe comment, hey, great, I just saw that come out, I'm really excited about it. So there is, quite a lot of having the conversations grouped, and also having them be a mix of kind of private and public and transparent, I think really helps with that communication. We also try to do things within the context of that tool to just start conversations. So, I think what's hardest is when you first join the team and you don't know, how do I reach out? Who does what? What do people like? How do I even know what to talk about with that person? So we do something called High Five Fridays and Get to Know You Wednesdays, which is silly. It's one of those little things that sort of somehow works. And every Wednesday, someone pops in, and it's always the same. We've got the same moderator. We change it maybe every couple months, but we've got the same person each week that knows to go in and pop in. And they just ask a silly question. So they say, what's your favorite beach read as you think about your summer holidays? Or, as school, the one this week, as school is starting, what was your favorite part about starting school? What's your favorite memory of this? Do you love going to the beach, or do you love going to the mountains? It just starts a conversation, and people go in there and they say, oh, I love doing this, and I just remembered this great thing, or they had a picture of their kids doing something fun. And you just sort of start a conversation that way that ends up allowing that kind of first entry to getting to know each other, that then you kind of further in other ways.
Super interesting. And so one thing that you said, though, is no email. And that
Yes.
sounds like a dream to me. I've also worked in an environment where there was no email, and it's hard to do. How did you get everybody on board to work in this way?
It was really hard at first. People were like, oh no, that's not going to work. We did it
Right.
maybe 2.5 years ago. And I remember I was a big proponent of it. And, I remember very much, our HR manager being like, that's a nice idea, Carrie, and we should try it. We should try that, and we can always go back the other way. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. This is going to be great. And so it was hard. It was changing those habits. But I think now that everyone's used to it, I don't really see, I think that email is very difficult to categorize and organize and find those conversations. And we just don't really have that problem anymore. So it's sort of sold itself at this point. So you don't have a lot of situations where people are kind of sneaking around and trying to use email, even though we did it first. At first people would forget and continue conversations via email. And at this point, it just doesn't happen anymore. We don't need to kind of enforce it.
So it's now within the culture. And also, I think once people go into a system like this, I'm very biased, of course, because I worked in a system like this and I loved it.
Yeah.
But I think once people get used to how it is, it's like, oh, why would we go back to this ancient, heavy tool like email?
Yeah, exactly.
It's nice to hear it's happening in other places. And yeah, I really like the camaraderie it sounds like you have in working in a system like this where people are asking questions and talking and transparent. Are most of the conversations transparent, most of the channels, so that people could go in if they wanted to, or how much is...
It's mixed. So there's workspaces and you have certain conversations in certain workspaces. So for example, the conversations I was describing, the sort of get to know you ones, those are everyone can join. There's no, it's very open. If you're talking about, particular areas of the business that shouldn't be public for everyone, then those are very much kept private through the way that the tool is designed and the way it's set up. So there's very good controls around it. But what we try to do, but for example, if you had like a marketing promotion, I'm just thinking of right now, you would want everyone to know about that.
Right.
But you wouldn't necessarily feel like, oh, I want to email everyone about that, or I want to message everyone about that. So you then, by opening up a conversation in a forum like that, it allows people who are interested in that kind of thing to kind of go in and, look around and learn about those things without the person who's maybe managing that promotion feeling like, oh, I've just kind of sent that out to everyone and bogged them down with that.
Right. It is. Yeah, email really does have that heavy feel. If you want to just send a flyer or a quick message, it does seem to be really heavy in that way. So it sounds like that's something that you guys do really well, sort of this online talking with each other and keeping up to date. What's something that's really hard or something challenging for your team? Meetings are challenging. So we have a sort of very low meetings culture. We don't believe that you have I shouldn't say that. We have some standard meetings that we always hold, but we try really hard to question whether we genuinely need a meeting, because you are talking about a lot of time zones. It's a very difficult thing to do. So we have a few regularly scheduled meetings and we try to make those really productive. But getting people on the phone on the fly, so all of a sudden, let's get everybody on the phone and talk about something. It's difficult because you've got, we're in Bali, Indonesia. We've got, a few people that are in like the sort of Central America, Argentina time zone, Pacific time zone, Eastern time zone. So, you're kind of all over the place. Australia. Right.
So it's a little tricky to get everyone on at the same time.
And do you do just voice calls, or is it also video calls? Do you use the video capabilities?
We do sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, yeah.
Okay, super interesting. So meetings are challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear it a lot. I mean, even with myself, time zones, it seems like basic math. It's just math, but I find myself struggling with time zones, and I hear teams also really struggling with time zones. And then I saw this video recently, which was the strangest time zones in the world, and it made me realize that actually time zones are quite complicated, quite more complicated than people would expect. It seems like always a challenge.
Yeah.
So in terms of management of the virtual teams, what kind of management techniques do you guys have for keeping your team? How do people know what each other are doing, and how does the management work?
Sure. I don't know that it works all that different than it would if you were in a traditional workspace, if you were all sitting in the same office. But I mean, essentially everyone has goals. So everyone has a view of what they need to be doing. It's quarterly goal setting process whereby, we have all of those conversations around what it is our priorities are, what it is we need to be focusing on, both at a business level and also on an individual personal level. And then, so we follow kind of a fairly standard approach in that regard. From in terms of like a visibility of what each of the teams are working on, what we do, and it's actually kind of it illustrates how difficult it is to do meetings and how we're trying to overcome that, is we actually have monthly business reviews for each functional area. And each of the teams produces a fairly meeting looking PowerPoint presentation that then is presented online. So we each go in, the idea is that, for example, let's say the marketing business review is shared on, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We all agree that within 24 hours, so, I'm in one time zone, someone else might be another, within 24 hours, that we'll all go in and review and comment and ask questions. And we have that conversation in a chat-like way, even though we can't all get on the phone.
Interesting. And it works, apparently.
It does. Yeah, it works pretty well. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely times when we say, hey, you know what, there's this one area that I want to delve into more. Let's pop on the phone and do that. And then we do that. But in most cases, where you're talking about just generally trying to understand maybe the trends of what's happened in a particular area of the business, taking the time to really flesh that out and putting it in a document sometimes is more powerful than if somebody just kind of arrived on the fly and tried to talk something through, because they really have to take the time to think through, hone their thoughts, pull data, really do some analysis, and really crystallize it and make it very succinct in a written way. In a way that in my previous experience working for big corporations, sometimes you get in a meeting and it would be like, people would walk in and they would just sort of talk off the cuff. And that was great in some ways, and you definitely need that. But this forces that really deep preparation and that really thoughtful, that really good thoughtfulness. And so it works.
I had never actually thought of that, where doing it in that way would give you the ability to really think about what you're seeing and what you're looking at. Especially, you're right, if you're going to a meeting and you're seeing something for the first time, it's like this initial response off the cuff, and you miss that deep dive that you'd get if you were like, let me think about this a little more and dive in a little bit further. So yeah, that's actually a benefit in terms of doing it in that way. Because I know a lot of times from working in the corporate environment, you get sent information in advance before the meeting, but nobody ever reads it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is we all commit to really, and we really do all go in and spend that time quickly to review all of it. Because if not, there's always the risk that you put something out there, you spend all this great time putting it together and no one reads it. And that's why you have that conversation. And they end up being really good conversations in the context of each of those, business area reviews.
Right. So anything else on management techniques that you guys have utilized or that you've found that have been really effective for working in this way?
I think that you need to have a really well-developed hiring strategy in order for the team to work. So, we spend a lot of time, as you know, if you're hiring virtually, you're also not meeting in person when you're hiring that individual.
Right.
So we have spent a tremendous amount of time, really looking at all of the different steps. And it's a fairly lengthy interview process. I mean, people have to really want to work with us to spend the time and invest the time in all of the different ways that we try to have those conversations. But we do a mix of video and written assessments, and, depending on what kind of role you're going into, obviously if it's an accountant role, then there's quite a lot of very practical practice returns, skill-based interviews, all of those kind of tests as well for a role like that. But what we find is that you really need to find people who don't need a lot of day-to-day handholding, that are really self-motivated, that are able to kind of know when to reach out and ask for help versus when they can maybe, figure things out on their own. And really, so we spend a lot of time with that interview process to hopefully reduce anything in the back end where you're having to then do a lot of management for people that maybe would do better in a physical office. So you need to find a particular skill set, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it seems, are there any benefits to doing the hiring all virtually versus seeing people in person, or is it just, it's the nature of this particular job? But I was thinking maybe there's something that's better when you do it virtually than having it in person.
I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't think it's a detriment, especially once you get into the point of having video. I mean, it feels like you really get to know the candidates via video. So yeah, maybe you aren't physically there in the same room, but when you're on video, you feel like you're physically there in the same room.
Right.
So I don't, and you also kind of get a sense of their, professionalism. I mean, I've interviewed people before where like you get into an interview and they don't realize like there's stuff in the background, or, they're wearing yoga clothes, or, things like that. You kind of get a sense for that. Whereas if someone was showing up in person, they would know to prepare for that. And so you need to see, it almost gives you a test of how well they'd be able to operate in a virtual environment by doing that interview virtually. Because if there's kids screaming in the background and, they're clearly not in an environment that's conducive to work, then, they just don't even really know what it takes. And so there is a little bit of that. I mean, luckily we don't end up with a lot of those kind of things, but if I had to pick one benefit, I think you can suss that out, kind of pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So then this brings up something that I've seen a lot, but I'm not sure if you encountered this a lot, which is people that have a really, I don't want to call it, I'm trying to get away from calling it digital illiteracy. So people who have trouble with the tech and the apps and how much it takes to keep on top of things. So I can imagine you get really good accountants who really want to work this way, but are overwhelmed maybe by the technology. Do you see that?
We screen for it in the interview process. We screen for it fairly heavily. So instead of looking at, just their accounting skills, we're absolutely looking at how they can communicate in the context of a virtual environment, because they'll be communicating with customers, and how frazzled they get by, a technical system not working, or, just learning how to use something new. So we definitely screen for that. And then we do a lot of work up front to get people comfortable. And we do that before they actually start, really start on the team. It's kind of the pre-prep process for them. And so we're very quickly able to suss out, you spend a lot of time explaining to them how to use the CRM system. And you can see really quickly if that is like a deer in headlights kind of moment, or if they just get it. And usually we do a good enough job with the screening process to not end up in that situation where we miss that.
Right.
But certainly at the beginning, I mean, I definitely took for granted a lot of the tech skills that we probably have all gathered from working remote, and didn't know to probe on that as much as we do now. And now it's just a standard part of the process.
Right. So you're screening for it in the hiring process, and then in the onboarding, it sounds like you do a significant amount of training to take people through that. Mm-hmm. So let's see. So one question that's not related to remote working, but is very interesting, which is why Bali? Why are you in Bali?
We just keep coming back, to be honest. We were living in London when we started the business. My husband and I started the business together in 2009. And we had a friend who had just spent 6 months here starting up his own business. And we were having breakfast with him, and he said, you should go down to Bali. It is, it's an extremely focused place. There's a good entrepreneurial community. It's a great place for kids. We've got 3 little kids. And we said, all right, we'll go down for a couple months, while we sort of, figure out where we want to go. We knew we didn't want to stay in London. Totally fell in love with it. It's a wonderful place for families. It's just a really, really nice lifestyle for little kids. And we've got 3 little boys. So they're at the beach right now, to give you a sense. They went after school, they went to the beach. I mean, I'm not sitting around worrying about how they're doing today, So that's great. And there's also a fairly good entrepreneurial community. So you do get the sense that sort of you run into something where you want to just kind of chat through a business challenge with somebody. You have some of those people that are doing things in a slightly different way, that kind of open your mind and thinking to new ways of maybe, doing business that you might not think of if you were in a more traditional environment.
Oh, super interesting. Super interesting. It's always an interesting story of why people go where they go.
Yeah.
And would you ever go back to working in the traditional office after trying this?
I think it would be really hard to do, because I'm not sure I would see what the benefit would be. So I think if someone said, okay, well, show up in an office right now, you think, well, what am I going to do that for? I mean, I've figured out a way that works really well for me to be really productive. And I do work in a co-working space most of the time because I find that it's nice to have that structure and that, basically to kind of have a place outside of the home. Even though I have an office here at home, I also have a co-working space. So I can see the benefit of that, but sort of putting me back into, a suit and a commute and, a cubicle, that I think would be a little hard.
Right, I can imagine. I could never go back now. And I think after, if an office looked at my social media accounts, they would be like, why would you, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Clearly you don't want to do this.
You don't want to do that, yeah.
Right. So what advice would you have for teams? I mean, after starting this company and building this remote team, what advice would you have for others who may want to start something similar? Clearly not with taxes, as that's your market, but if they're doing a different business, what would you say to watch out for?
I think that what worked well for us is to hire, and what advice I generally give to friends when they ask similar questions is to hire the absolute best people you can as early on as you can. So if you need to stretch your finances at the beginning, just hire someone really fabulous. Don't hire 3 okay people. Hire one really, one person who can really, really help you, and then continue and just make sure you've got that quality of the team, because ultimately, that's what's going to help grow your business. That's what's going to allow you to focus on building the business as opposed to just running the business. And I think often startups get stuck in that cycle of like, I need to start with this really big team, and they hire, but they only have a small budget, and they hire like 4 or 5 underqualified people with the idea that they have the right potential and they can train them up. But it's pretty time consuming to train up new people if you're also trying to start a team. So my advice is just really focus in on who you're bringing in and, stretch to afford as much as you can and as best people as you can. And just focus on that kind of one at a time and build up. Don't feel like you have to start with this giant group, especially if you can't afford a very qualified giant group.
That is really good advice. I've actually not heard that before, which is interesting. So really focusing on hiring the best person for the job, because you want to be able to focus on what you're focusing on and then make sure that that function is taken care of, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So the best person for the job.
Yeah. And also, hiring somebody who's good at things that you're not good at is really helpful too. So I think often people hire someone that's very similar to what they can do, because they admire those qualities. They look for those qualities. It resonates with them. Whereas if you hire somebody who can do something that you're not particularly good at, it's great. All of a sudden everyone wants to do exactly what they're doing. So that's worked pretty well for us too, in terms of thinking, can this person add value that I couldn't, as opposed to, is this person just a natural extension of me?
Right. Yeah, I can imagine that's really hard to do, because we all gravitate naturally to people who are similar in thoughts and the way that we do, indeed. So then one last question. I know we're reaching time here. One last question, which is, what's the best way, if people want to find out more, there's of course your website, but what's the best way to get in touch and to find out more about what you're doing?
Sure. If you want to talk about the business itself, then getting in touch with me directly is great. So my email is cmckeegan@greenbacktaxservices.com. If you need help from a tax service perspective, then it's best to go to our team directly that's managing all of the customer relationships, and that would probably the best email address to start with would be the info@greenbacktaxservices.com. So either way.
Great. Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. I'll just let for people who are listening, I actually found out about this from people. I was unhappy with my current accountant, and lots of people in the expat world said, oh, you've got to go to Greenback. It's really the place to go. And in fact, my expat lawyer recommended it here in the Netherlands. He said, go to Greenback. That's the only place to go. So yeah, and then I went through the process and was super impressed. And of course, as I heard about how the team was structured, I thought, I've got to get in touch. I've got to know more about how you guys are doing this. Is super interesting, because it seems like you're right, there must be lots and lots of people out there who are needing help with this. As there's more digital nomads, as there's more people traveling the world needing this kind of service. So I guess, okay, so one last question, which is, do you see a lot of digital nomads coming to you, or what kind of people are coming to you? I can imagine, yeah, expats broadly, but are there any more specific groups?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the IRS has traditionally done a fairly not very good job of letting people know what their requirements are, so what they need to be doing. So we unfortunately get a lot of people who didn't have any, might have been living abroad for many years and had no idea they needed to file, or maybe didn't know they needed to file foreign bank account report forms, but did file tax, things like that. And maybe had gotten some misinformation from their prior US accountant, because again, there's not a lot of really great visibility there. So we get a lot of people who come to us kind of in a panic, like, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to go back to the US? What am I going to do? And we try very much to pride ourselves on being able to share exactly what you need to do and what the real penalties are. So, here's the worst case scenario, but what usually happens and how do you usually end up kind of seeing out the other end of that? So we focus very heavily on that and get a lot of people who, are really hadn't known, were technically delinquent filers, but it was purely because they didn't know, that they're just starting to get that awareness.
Right. And you're not getting letters in the mail saying, hey, we noticed that you've been in France for a couple of years.
Yeah. No one knows, they think I'm gone. And, even if you kind of know you're supposed to do it, it's easy for it to fall off your radar because you're often filing, in most cases, you're filing tax returns in the country you're living in too. So you kind of think, oh, I've ticked that box.
Right. So for all you expats out there, get in touch with Greenback. Get these things taken care of. Yeah, you need to file. Luckily, I knew from the beginning. It's been 6 years now since I've been in the Netherlands, so I knew from the beginning. So there's no emergencies on this front.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
It's been really interesting to hear how your team works, and I hope that other people get value from hearing your story. So thank
you. I appreciate your time.
And until next time, everybody, be powerful.